In this video, we're going to be talking about the midpoint formula. The midpoint of a line segment with endpoints, so we call them x1, y1, and x2, y2 to show the two endpoints, will be the coordinate where we add the x1, x2, divide by 2, and that gives us our x value of the coordinate, and then add y1, y2, divide by 2, and that gives us the y coordinate. So essentially we're finding the average of the x coordinates, and that's the x coordinate of our midpoint, the average of our y coordinate, and that gives us the y coordinate of the midpoint. Let's go ahead and look at this example here. It says find the midpoint of the line segment that joins point P at -2, 5 and point Q at 4, -6. Now don't confuse this formula with the distance formula. In the distance formula, you find the difference in those x values and then square it, the difference in the y values and square it. For the midpoint, we are adding them and divide by 2. As I mentioned, it's like the average. The average of the x points, the average of the y's, is going to get us to that midpoint, halfway from one point to another. So visually what's happening is if I have a line segment, I want to know if this was point P and this was point Q, which they're not because I didn't graph them to where they actually are. But what's happening here, if I have these two endpoints, P and Q, the midpoint is going to be that point halfway between. Okay, so that's why we add the x's, divide by 2, add the y's, divide by 2, and then our answer is a coordinate. It is a point on that line, which you could always graph it and check. And if it doesn't end up on that line, you didn't find the midpoint. So I'm going to use M for midpoint, and again, I'm going to take the x's, so x1, y1, x2, y2, add the x's together, 2 plus 4, divide by 2. That's half of our coordinate. Take the y's, 5 plus a -6, divide by 2. That's going to be our y coordinate. We simplify. 2 plus 4 is +2, and 5 plus -6 is a -1. And then lastly, 2 divided by 2 is 1, and we can leave 1/2 as 1/2. That's in lowest terms. So the midpoint between P and Q is 1, -1/2. Again, it is a coordinate, it is a point on that line. Why don't you go ahead and try the next two examples. The second one's a little bit different. You're given different information, so make sure you're reading it. First example on the right-hand side says find the midpoint of the segment with endpoints 8, -2, -3, 4. I'm going to label my points x1, y1, x2, y2. And really I just do that so I can visually see quickly where's my x, where's my y, and make sure I'm adding the right coordinates to the right coordinates. My midpoint will be add up the x's, 8 plus a -3, x1 plus x2, divided by 2. Add up my y values, -2 plus 4, divided by 2. Simplify all that. 8 plus a -3 is 5, and -2 plus 4 is 2, and then 5/2, you could write it as 2.5, 2.5, just depending on what your directions say, and 1 divided by 1 is, 2 divided by 2 is 1. And again, with that fraction, you could leave it as 5/2, you could turn it into a mixed number, you can turn it into a decimal. It's just pay attention to things like on your homework if it has specific directions on how they want you to write that final answer. The next one says the midpoint of AB is at 3, 4. So we know the midpoint right now. It says if A is -2, 5, find B. Okay, so we actually know the midpoint and one of the points. We don't know the other endpoint. So we're going to plug in what we do know from our equation, or from our points here. So the midpoint itself is 3, 4. So we know the answer to simplifying that formula above. And we know half of the point. We know x1, y1. So I would add -2 plus, I don't know b. So x2, y2, I don't know that. I'm just going to put x2 here, divided by 2. And then for the y coordinate, I would do the y1, which is 5, plus y2. I don't know anything about y2 because I don't know the b endpoint. Divide by 2, and there's the coordinate. But as you can see here, the 3 is tied to the x coordinate of our midpoint. The 4 is tied to the y coordinate, so this whole piece here. So I could break those up into two different equations of 3 has to equal -2 plus x2 over 2, and 4 has to equal 5 plus y squared divided by 2. Right? Because that's my x value has to equal the x coordinate of the midpoint. This is the y value has to equal the y coordinate of my midpoint. I solve both of these by starting to multiply both sides by 2 to clear out that denominator. This will give me 6 equals -2 plus x2, and 8 equals 5 plus y2. One last thing to get those alone, I'm going to add 2 to both sides here. So that means that x2 is 8. And I'm going to subtract 5. And that says that y2 is a positive 3. So my final answer is that coordinate. I want to know b, the coordinate of b. And b will be x was 8, y was 3. So make sure you're putting it together back into a coordinate.